My name is Ibrahim, and I am 36 years old, and I was born into a life most men dream of, but few survive with their soul intact. I was raised inside high walls, polished with marble and silence, a Saudi prince by blood, taught from my first breath. That obedience was worship, and questions were rebellion. My earliest memories are not of toys, but of prayer mats, perfectly aligned, and voices correcting my posture before correcting my thoughts. I learned to recite before I learned to feel, and I learned fear before I learned love. Faith was not a relationship, it was a command, and God was not a father. He was an authority watching me, waiting for me to fail. I was told I was chosen, blessed, favored, yet I felt hollow, like a beautifully wrapped box with nothing inside. I wore white robes and gold watches, but inside I was a child, holding his breath, afraid to ask why the nights felt so empty. I memorized verses about submission and honor, and obedience to parents, especially fathers, because my father was not just a man, he was a law. When he entered a room, the air changed, servants froze, conversations died, and even my heartbeat seemed to slow to match his steps. I loved him because I was commanded to, but I feared him because I had seen what happened to men who disappointed him. Disgrace was worse than death in our world, and shame could erase a name faster than a bullet. I grew up surrounded by brothers who competed for approval and mothers who learned silence as survival. Women were present, but unheard, their eyes lowered, their opinions buried beneath tradition. I did not question this aloud, but something in me resisted quietly like a wound that would not heal. I prayed 5 times a day because I was told to, not because I wanted to, and every time my forehead touched the ground, I felt smaller, not closer to God. I remember being 12 years old, asking my tutor what it meant that Allah was merciful. When mercy in our house felt conditional, he struck the table and told me mercy belonged to those who obeyed. That night, I cried into my pillow and asked God silently if he could hear a boy who was afraid of his own thoughts. As I grew older, the expectations tightened around my chest like a rope I was to marry, who they chose, speak when permitted, and inherit power without weakness. There was no room for doubt, no space for softness. Yet late at night, when the palace slept, I would stare at the ceiling and feel a hunger I could not name. I wanted a God who saw me, not just my obedience. I wanted to be known, not controlled. But wanting was dangerous, so I buried it beneath discipline and routine. I became very good at pretending, very good at smiling during Eid gatherings. While my stomach twisted, I learned how to lead prayers while feeling nothing inside. I learned how to be admired while feeling invisible. If you are watching this and you feel trapped behind expectations you did not choose, I want you to know you are not alone. And if stories like mine matter to you, please subscribe, like, comment, and share, because there are many still living in silence who need to know. Escape is possible. I did not know then that my life was about to fracture completely. That the next command from my father would not just test my loyalty, but destroy the fragile wall holding my soul together. When he summoned me one evening, his voice calm and final, I felt something cold settle in my chest. I did not know what he would ask, only that saying no was never an option. And that night, the privilege I was born into became the prison that would break me. I was told my marriage would be an honor, a responsibility, a continuation of blood, and power. My father spoke as if he were granting me a gift and not sealing my fate. I was 30 and had never chosen anything important for myself, so when he named the woman and the date, I nodded like a trained child. The ceremony was massive, full of scholars, princes, and cameras, but I felt detached, like I was watching another man's life unfold. My wife was young, quiet, and terrified, and when our eyes met, I saw my own fear reflected back at me. We were strangers, bound by obedience, not love. On the first night, I tried to speak gently to her, telling her she was safe with me. But even as I said it, my voice trembled because I did not believe it myself. Weeks passed in polite distance until the summons came again. My father called me alone. This time no advisors, no guards. He spoke of tradition, of rights, of how women were entrusted to the patriarch, and how sons must honor fathers, even in matters that test the heart. He did not look at me when he said, "my wife." I would spend certain nights with him, as was done before, as was permitted, as was justified. He quoted scholars and verses twisted into permission, and my body went cold. I wanted to scream to refuse to disappear, but I stood frozen because the word no had never existed between us. I returned to my room and stared at the wall while my wife cried softly in the corner, asking what she had done wrong. I had no words because I had failed her before anything even happened. That night, I prayed harder than I ever had, begging Allah to stop this, to intervene, to strike me dead if necessary. Silence answered me. Days turned into a ritual of humiliation. I became a husband in name, only watching my authority dissolve, while my conscience rotted. I felt rage toward my father, toward the system, toward myself, but I swallowed it all, because survival demanded silence. Scholars reassured me this was sacrifice, obedience, reward awaited me if I endured. Yet every fiber of my being screamed that something holy could not feel this vile. I avoided mirrors because I could not face the man who allowed this. I stopped eating, lost weight, and slept in fragments, haunted by my wife's empty gaze when she was taken from our quarters. I felt something tear inside me, a final thread snapping. I wanted to protect her, but I was powerless, imprisoned by blood and fear. I began to hate the prayers that once gave structure to my day because they felt like mockery. Bowing felt like betrayal, not devotion. One night, I confronted my father with shaking hands, telling him this was wrong, not as a son, but as a man. He looked at me with disappointment, not anger, and said weakness had entered my heart, and weakness was dangerous. He warned me that princes who we forget their place are erased quietly. I left his presence knowing I had crossed an invisible line. The choice before me was clear: obey and lose my soul, or resist and lose my life. I sat alone in the dark, realizing faith had become the weapon. Used against everything decent inside me, I whispered into the silence, asking God if he could see me now, and for the first time, I did not feel heard and only watched. The marriage that was meant to strengthen me had shattered me, and I knew I could not survive much longer living this divided life. Something inside me was dying, and if I did not choose soon, nothing of me would remain. I stopped sleeping the way a human sleeps and began drifting like a ghost between minutes. My nights were filled with sweat and choking silence, and my days felt unreal. During Fajr prayer, my body moved, but my heart resisted. I would press my forehead to the carpet and feel nothing except disgust. I was angry at myself for failing, and angry at God for allowing it. I remembered being a child, told that obedience was protection, yet obedience had delivered me to this abyss. I began waking before dawn, not to pray, but to pace endlessly in silence alone. Sleep deprivation blurred my memories and sharpened my guilt. I saw my wife's face everywhere, in reflections, in water, in polished marble walls. Her quiet terror followed me into every room. I tried to drown myself in Quran recitation, searching for relief. But the verses felt hollow. Scholars spoke of patience, reward, and hierarchy, yet none spoke of love or protection. I read commentaries explaining power as divine order and felt sick. Flashbacks returned of my teacher praising submission, saying a man proves faith by silence. Those lessons now tasted poisonous and destroyed my trust completely beyond repair forever. I forced myself to continue Salah because stopping felt dangerous, but each movement felt like betrayal. I whispered verses while my stomach turned. During sujood, tears fell onto the carpet, and I prayed for numbness, if not justice. I began reading Islamic law late at night, hunting for a rule that would condemn what I was living. Instead, I found permissions, loopholes, and silence. The more I studied, the more isolated I felt. Truth seemed flexible for the powerful and rigid for the weak. My faith cracked quietly, violently, leaving nothing stable inside my chest anymore at all. Now, memories of childhood returned, uninvited. I saw myself memorizing verses, under watchful eyes, being praised for accuracy, never for compassion. I remembered being told paradise favored obedience over empathy, and that doubt was a disease. Those teachings once felt solid, now they felt cruel. I asked myself whether a just God would demand the destruction of conscience. The question frightened me because it felt forbidden. I felt watched by walls, cameras, and heaven itself. yet silence felt worse than damnation. I carried this fear alone, without counsel. Without refuge, without rest, while days collapsed into nights around me, my body began reacting before my mind could catch up. My hands shook during meetings, and my voice cracked when elders spoke of honor, food lost, taste, and my reflection. I looked older, hollowed. I felt trapped between terror of disobedience and terror of becoming nothing. I stopped trusting imams because their answers protected systems, not souls. I wondered if truth could exist outside, inherited fear that, thought, felt treasonous. Yet it returned again and again, refusing burial inside my chest, where shame and duty fought endlessly without mercy. Yet both destroyed my remaining strength, slowly, until I broke. I stopped believing peace would come through endurance. Instead, I felt my faith rotting like a sealed wound. I feared hell, yet I feared living more. The idea that God might be unjust terrified me more than punishment, because it meant goodness was an illusion. I whispered questions into darkness and waited for thunder or comfort. Neither came, only my heartbeat answered, loud and accusing. I began to wonder if truth was something discovered, not inherited. That idea changed everything. I felt the ground shifting. Beneath every belief I carried since childhood without my consent, understanding followed, shame became my constant companion. I hid my eyes from servants, avoided family gatherings, and answered questions with rehearsed smiles. At night, I replayed moments where I should have resisted earlier, spoken louder, acted braver, regret gnawed relentlessly. I wondered whether silence had made me complicit. I feared that my inaction had already condemned me morally beyond repair. This weight pressed on my chest until breathing hurt and panic crept in without warning. My world narrowed to survival, where truth felt lethal and lies felt temporarily safe, yet both destroyed my remaining strength slowly. Every single day I began whispering a question I never dared think. If God is just, why does obedience feel evil? Saying it made my heart race as if angels were recording my treason. I expected immediate punishment, but none came. Instead, there was only silence and the sound of my breath. The absence of wrath confused me more than fear. It was the first crack where curiosity entered. I did not feel relief, but I felt honesty, and that frightened me deeply, because honesty threatened everything I had been taught to protect, including family, faith, identity, and survival. Instincts. That night, I sat alone on the floor, unable to pray, unable to sleep. I stared at the ceiling and whispered again, softer, if God is just, why does this feel evil? The words hung heavy, but something inside me steadied. I did not feel faith shatter. I felt illusion break. I knew then that my old understanding could not survive truth. This realization did not bring peace. It brought terror. Yet terror was honest, and honesty became my first rebellion against fear tradition. Control and a God of silence that never answered. My suffering protected me. I lay there, knowing nothing would ever be the same. I had crossed an invisible boundary inside my own mind. Faith, built on fear, had collapsed, and something unknown waited beyond. I did not know its name, only that I could no longer pretend I slept, as dawn approached with tears drying on my face and a strange clarity forming. If truth existed, it would demand everything from me, including my life. I did not. I know then that this question would lead me to Jesus and begin my escape from darkness that had defined my existence. For years, I reached the bottom of myself the night the dream came. I had not eaten all day, and the walls of my room felt like they were closing inward, breathing with me, watching me. I lay on my back, staring into darkness, asking nothing, expecting nothing, because disappointment had become safer than hope. My body finally surrendered sometime before dawn, and I fell into a sleep that felt heavier than usual, deeper than rest. It was not like other dreams. There was no chaos, no shifting scenes, no noise. I was standing alone in a vast open place with no walls, no palace, no guards. The air was warm and still, and I felt exposed, yet unafraid. Then I saw him approaching from a distance, dressed entirely in white, not glowing, not dramatic, just pure and calm, as if peace itself had learned how to walk. My heart began to race because something in me recognized him before my mind could speak. He stopped a few steps away and looked at me, not through me, not over me, but directly at me, like he had been waiting a long time to see my face. He said, "My name Ibrahim," not loudly, not softly, but with certainty, as if no one else had ever said it correctly before. My knees weakened and I fell to the ground, but he did not command me to bow. He stepped closer and knelt with me, placing his hand over my chest where the pain lived, and when he touched me, the weight I had carried for years cracked open and poured out in silence. He said words that felt like they were entering my bones. "You are not owned, not by blood, not by fear, not by men." I wanted to speak to, ask questions to, explain myself, to beg forgiveness, but no words came, only tears. Then he smiled, not like a ruler, but like someone who understood suffering, and said, "Follow me." I woke up violently, gasping, my heart pounding, my sheets soaked with sweat, yet my saffins. The chest felt light for the first time in years. I sat, up shaking, looking around my room, expecting guards or punishment, but there was only silence, and the echo of peace lingering like warmth on skin. The name Isa repeated in my mind, uninvited, persistent. I whispered it aloud and felt my throat tighten. I had been taught Jesus was only a prophet, nothing more, yet this presence was unlike anything I had known. Fear rushed in immediately. What if this was deception? What if I was being tested? What if I had crossed a line that could not to be uncrossed? I performed wudu and tried to pray, but my hands trembled and the words would not form. Instead, I sat on the floor, replaying every detail of the dream, afraid to forget a single moment. The calm in his eyes, the firmness in his. I voiced the way he did not demand submission, but offered freedom. I spent the day distracted, barely answering questions, avoiding mirrors because I felt changed, exposed, like something had been uncovered. I searched Islamic sources for dreams, interpretations, hoping to neutralize what had happened, but nothing fit. This was not symbolic, not abstract. It was personal, intentional, intimate. That night, I slept again, half afraid, half desperate to see him return, but the dream did not repeat. Still, the peace remained, confusing and dangerous. I began to question everything I had been taught about Jesus late at night. On my phone, with the brightness turned low, I typed his name into a search bar, my fingers trembling as if committing a crime. Articles, sermons, testimonies flooded my screen, stories of Muslims dreaming of Jesus, stories I had been warned were lies, yet my chest burned with recognition. I listened to a whispered sermon through headphones, afraid someone might hear, and when the speaker quoted, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," I broke down sobbing because it felt like he was speaking directly to me. I replayed the dream again and again, trying to find fault but found none. Instead, I found longing. I wanted to see him again, to hear him speak again, to understand why he would come to someone like me, a man raised to fear him, reject him, deny him. Yet he had called my name, not as an enemy, but as someone known. The fear of hell still lived in me, but now there was another fear, greater and sharper, the fear of turning away from truth. I did not sleep much that night because hope had entered my life uninvited, and hope was dangerous in a world built on control. Still, I could not deny what had happened. I had been seen, I touched, named, and for the first time in my life, God did not feel distant or angry. He felt near and gentle and real. I did not know then what this would cost me, only that something had begun that could not be undone. I lay awake until dawn, whispering, "Isa, Isa, Isa," afraid and alive, knowing that the man in white had changed the direction of my soul forever. I treated my phone like contraband after that night, keeping it hidden beneath cushions and behind books, as if it could betray me with a sound. I waited until everyone slept and then slipped into the bathroom, locking the door and sitting on the cold tile with my back against the wall. I searched again for Jesus, and this time I downloaded a Bible app, my hands shaking as if I were holding a weapon. I half expected alarms to sound or angels to strike me, but nothing happened. Only words appeared, simple black text on a white screen. I started with the Gospel of John. Because someone online said it was for seekers, I read slowly, afraid of misunderstanding, afraid of feeling too much. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Those lines unsettled me, yet they drew me in. Like gravity. Jesus did not speak like the figures I knew. He did not threaten or demand. He invited, he asked questions, he touched the unclean, and defended the accused. When he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free," I put my phone down and stared at the wall, because freedom was a word I had never associated with God. Freedom was dangerous, yet my chest ached for it. I read about a father who runs to his returning son, and I felt tears gather because I had never imagined God running toward me. I read about Jesus confronting religious leaders, calling out hypocrisy, and suddenly my anger made sense. It was not rebellion, it was recognition. I listened to sermons through headphones, volume low, heart loud, and when pastors spoke of grace, not earned, not inherited, not enforced, something in me softened and resisted at the same time. Fear still ruled me. I cleared my history, deleted apps, reinstalled them, hid files, renamed folders. My phone became my secret chapel, and my fear became my shadow. Cameras felt closer, eyes sharper. Servants lingered longer near doors. My wife was gone, and no one spoke her name. I began sleeping with the Bible app open on my chest, like armor. I memorized verses, not for debate, but for survival. Come to me, all who are weary became my breath. I compared Jesus to everything I had endured. He protected women, restored dignity, and confronted power without becoming it. He submitted without surrendering truth. He suffered without becoming cruel. I realized slowly, painfully, that this was the opposite of everything that had broken me. I wanted to believe, but belief felt like stepping off a cliff. I imagined my father's face, my family's wrath. The word apostate whispered like a death sentence. I imagined losing everything, and my body reacted before my mind could reason. Panic seized me, and I shut the app, promising myself I would stop. That promise lasted less than an hour. Curiosity returned, like hunger. I watched testimonies of men, like me, hiding, trembling, speaking in shadows, yet smiling with a peace I could not explain. One man said, "Jesus met me when no one else could," and I whispered, "Yes, yes, that is it." I wanted proof beyond emotion, so I searched arguments, contradictions, historical claims I expected to find, lies. Instead, I found coherence. I found a suffering God, not a distant ruler. I found love that did not require fear to function. Yet fear still clung to me. I checked locks repeatedly, startled at footsteps, flinched at sudden sounds. My inner world was splitting open between what I was taught and what I was encountering. The more I read, the more exposed I felt, as if Jesus were reading me back. When he said, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it," I closed my eyes because that was my life, exactly, preserved through silence, at the cost of everything real. One night, I could not hold it in anymore. I locked myself in the bathroom again, slid down the wall, and pressed my forehead to the tile. Not in ritual, but in desperation. I did not know how to pray to him. I did not know the rules. So I spoke honestly. "Jesus, if you are real, if you saw me, if you meant what you said, then save me. I cannot live like this. I am afraid. I am broken. I need you." My voice cracked and my body shook, waiting for judgment or silence. Instead, there was a stillness that felt like arms around my shoulders. I cried quietly until exhaustion took me. There was no thunder, no vision, only a gentle certainty that I had been heard. That frightened me, more than silence ever had, because now I was responsible for truth. I lay awake afterward, listening to my own breathing, feeling watched not by fear, but by love, and love demanded response. The world outside my door had not changed, but inside something irreversible had begun. I did not yet call myself Christian. I did not yet understand theology, but I knew this Jesus was different, and he was calling me. Not to power, but to life, and answering him would cost me everything I had been trained to protect. Yet for the first time, the cost felt worth paying, because staying meant dying slowly. Every day I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you," unsure for what exactly, but grateful all the same, knowing the next step would expose me completely, and there would be no turning back from the path I had opened with a single desperate prayer. The shift was subtle at first, the kind that lives in pauses and glances. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Phones were placed face down. Servants watched me too carefully. One evening, my phone was not where I left it, and my heart began to pound so hard I thought I would faint. I retrieved it later, untouched, yet the message was clear. I was being watched. I became careful with every word, every movement, every breath. Fear returned sharper than before, because now it had a name. I tried to pray quietly to Jesus, but anxiety strangled my thoughts. Days later, my uncle summoned me under the pretense of concern. His smile was rehearsed, his questions too gentle. Have you been restless? Are you reading strange things? Do you feel confused spiritually? I answered, carefully using language learned from years of survival. But my hands betrayed me, shaking slightly. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion. That night I was called into a room I had not entered since childhood, where discipline was administered and silence enforced. My father was not there. Instead, 2 elders, an imam, and a security officer waited, seated like judges. The imam spoke first, asking about my faith, my prayers, my obedience. I responded with caution, but the words felt hollow. Then he asked directly, "Do you believe Jesus is more than a prophet?" My mouth went dry, and my chest tightened. I wanted to lie. I had lied my whole life to survive, but something in me resisted. The memory of the man in white, his eyes, his voice flooded my mind. I hesitated, and the room went still. That pause told them everything. They pressed harder, quoting scripture, warning of apostasy, of fire, of disgrace. The security officer mentioned consequences not with threats, but with certainty. They spoke of rehabilitation, of the protection of removing influences. I realized then that my wife had not been taken for safety. She had been taken as leverage. I asked where she was, and silence answered me. My heart broke anew. I felt trapped between terror and truth. I remembered the verse, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it." My body shook and tears burned my eyes, but I lifted my head and spoke quietly. I said, "I believe Jesus is the truth. I believe he is the Son of God." The words felt heavy and freeing all at once, like chains falling and doors slamming. The imam shouted, accusing me of madness, Western poison, demonic deception. My uncle covered his face in shame. The security officer stood and left, making a call. The elders rose, and the meeting ended without resolution, only threat. I was escorted back to my quarters, where guards now waited outside. My access was restricted, my movements monitored. My phone was confiscated. That night I sat on my bed, shaking, whispering, prayers without words, expecting death or disappearance. Yet peace surprised me again, fragile but real. I was not brave. I was terrified, but I was honest for the first time. The next day my father returned. He did not speak to me directly. Orders were issued, assets frozen, privileges revoked. My name was removed from certain records, quietly, efficiently, as if erasing me from memory. Servants avoided my eyes. I was alone, more than ever. Yet strangely I felt less alone than before, because truth stood with me even in isolation. Days passed in confinement until I was summoned once more. This time, my father was present. His face was calm, unreadable. He asked me to renounce Christ publicly, to declare confusion, temporary weakness. He offered restoration, protection, silence in exchange for denial. My heart screamed to accept, to survive, but another voice, quieter, stronger, answered. No, I told him I could not deny what I had encountered. His eyes hardened, and he said then, "You are no longer my son." He turned away and dismissed me like a servant. I walked out, stripped of identity, inheritance, protection, unsure if I would be allowed to leave the building alive. That night, I was escorted to a vehicle and driven out, without explanation, released into the city with no money, no documents, only the clothes I wore. Fear returned full force, but beneath it was something steady. I whispered, "Jesus, I am afraid, but I trust you. I do not know what tomorrow holds, but I choose you." The words did not remove danger, but they anchored me. I had crossed the line publicly, irreversibly. I was now an apostate, a traitor, a dead man in many eyes. Yet for the first time, my faith was not inherited, not enforced, not hidden. It was chosen. And even as I walked into the night, uncertain, hunted, and alone, I felt a strange calm settle in my chest. The cost had arrived, and it was immense. but so was the freedom I tasted. In that moment, I did not know where I would sleep or how I would survive, but I knew who I belonged to, and that knowledge carried me forward, step by trembling, step into a future I could not yet see but refused to deny any longer. They brought me before my father at dusk, when the call to prayer echoed through the city like a warning. The room was familiar yet colder, stripped of warmth by expectation. He sat where he always had, spine straight, eyes sharp, authority radiating without effort. I stood alone, no guards, no elders, no imam, just blood and power facing truth and conscience. He did not rise, he did not greet me. He studied me like a defect and spoke with controlled disappointment, asking one final time if I would renounce Jesus and restore order. He said, my name, like a title he could still reclaim. I felt fear surge, but it did not command me anymore. I remembered the dream, the hand on my chest, the words, you are not owned. I spoke slowly, choosing honesty over survival. I told him I could not deny what I had seen or heard or felt. I told him Jesus had met me when the system he ruled had crushed me, and that I would rather lose everything than lie again. His face darkened, not with rage at first, but with disbelief, as if reality had betrayed him. He argued tradition, honor, lineage, the shame my decision would bring upon generations. I listened respectfully because he was still my father, but something had shifted. His words no longer owned me. He accused me of weakness, of betrayal, of inviting chaos into our bloodline. I reminded me of everything I would lose: wealth, protection, family, even my name. I felt grief for what might have been, but peace held me steady. I told him I loved him, but obedience without truth had destroyed me. I said, Jesus taught me that authority without love becomes tyranny, and those words shattered the room. He stood abruptly, fury breaking through control. He declared me dead to him, stripped me of inheritance, rank, and protection, and ordered that I be erased quietly from records as if I had never existed. His voice trembled, not with doubt but wounded pride, and for a moment I saw not a ruler, but a man terrified of losing control. That realization broke my heart more than the punishment. He turned away, dismissing me with a gesture, and I walked out without looking back, because looking back would have killed my resolve. The corridor felt endless footsteps, echoing like a funeral march. I expected hands to grab me, bullets to follow, but none came. Outside, the air felt sharper, colder. I breathed deeply, as if learning how, for the first time, a car waited not as escort but as expulsion. The driver avoided my eyes and released me near a crowded street where no one knew my name. I stood there, stunned, watching people live ordinary lives, while mine collapsed entirely. Fear returned in waves, but it no longer ruled me. I had lost a crown but gained clarity. I had been disowned but not abandoned. I whispered, Jesus, I have nothing now, and felt peace. Answer me without words. I walked through the city, blending into shadows, aware that danger followed, but truth walked with me too. I found temporary shelter through whispered contacts and kindness from strangers who did not know my past, only my need. That night alone, on a thin mattress, I mourned my family, my wife, my lost future, and allowed myself to grieve honestly without shame. I forgave my father, not because he asked, but because hatred would chain me again. I realized then that power had ruled my life, but fear no longer would. I had chosen Christ publicly, irrevocably, and though my body trembled, my soul felt steady. The road ahead was uncertain. Exile, loneliness, risk. But I was free from pretending, and freedom tasted stronger than fear. As sleep finally came, I did not dream of palaces or authority. I dreamed of walking light and unburdened, knowing the hardest confrontation was over, and the cost, though severe, had not destroyed me. It had revealed who I truly was for the first time, and that truth carried me into the unknown without regret. Exile did not arrive dramatically. It settled slowly, like dust on my lungs. Every sound startled me. Every knock sent my heart racing. I moved from place to place, never staying long. Learning the art of invisibility, I slept lightly, always listening. Nightmares followed me, dreams of doors slamming, voices chanting my name like a curse. I woke soaked in sweat, whispering prayers to Jesus, because fear no longer drove me to ritual, it drove me to relationship. I had nothing left to lose, and that stripped prayer of performance. I spoke to him like a man drowning, speaking between breaths. Some nights I felt his presence strongly. Other nights I felt nothing at all. But I kept speaking because silence was no longer safer. Community found me quietly through encrypted messages and whispered introductions. I met believers who had lost families, careers, nations for the same reason. They did not ask for my past, they welcomed my present. We prayed in living rooms with curtains drawn, shared bread, and stories and scars. I learned what church really meant, not buildings, but bodies, gathered in trust. For the first time, men wept openly, women spoke freely, and no one demanded silence as proof of faith. Healing did not arrive instantly. It came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent. I wrestled with guilt over my wife, my brothers, my mother. I forgave my father daily, sometimes hourly, because anger resurfaced unexpectedly. Jesus did not rush me. He met me where I was patient, steady, never demanding perfection, only honesty. One evening during prayer, someone read from Corinthians, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away," and something in me broke open. I realized exile had stripped my false identity so truth could breathe. Weeks later, they spoke to me about baptism. I felt fear again because baptism meant death publicly, spiritually. Finally, I remembered my dream. The hand on my chest, the words, "You are not owned." I said yes. The night came quietly. We drove outside the city to a private place. Water, cold, moon, high. I wore simple clothes, nothing royal, nothing inherited. I stepped into the water, shaking not from cold, but from finality. I lowered me beneath the surface. I held my breath and thought of everything I was leaving behind. Power, fear, bloodline control. When I rose, water streaming from my face, I gasped, not just for air, but for life. I felt clean, lighter, as if chains had dissolved without sound. Tears mixed with water and laughter escaped me unexpectedly. I was no longer who they named me. I belonged to Christ. After that night, the fear did not vanish, but it changed. It no longer owned me. I learned to live, carefully, but not cowardly. I worked small jobs, learned humility, learned joy and simplicity. I read scripture openly, now savoring words that once terrified me. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want," became my anchor. I wanted many things. Still, but I lacked nothing essential. Love found me again, not romantic, but familial. Brothers and sisters bound by truth, not blood. My past did not disappear, but it lost authority. I carried it without being crushed. I still grieved, still wondered about my wife, prayed for her safety, daily trusted Jesus with what I could not change. Exile became wilderness, and wilderness became training ground. God was no longer distant. He was near, guiding quietly, teaching me to listen. The fecte, a quiet voice I once feared, now comforted me. I learned that freedom does not mean absence of danger, it means presence of peace. And peace walked with me, even when my future remained uncertain. I was no longer a prince, but I was a son, and that identity could not be revoked, erased, or threatened. I slept one night under a borrowed roof, listening to rain, and realized I was not alone. I had been found not by power, but by grace, and that grace carried me forward into a life I never imagined but would never trade again. Freedom did not arrive with celebration, it arrived quietly, like breath returning after near drowning. I no longer had a crown, a name that opened doors, or a future written by blood. Yet, I woke each day without the weight that once crushed my chest. I learned to walk the streets unnoticed, to eat simply, to listen more than speak, and in that smallness I found dignity I had never known. Peace was not the absence of fear, but the presence of Christ beside me in it. When I prayed now, I did not bow from terror. I lifted my heart from trust. Jesus was no longer a distant figure from a forbidden dream. He was my companion, my defender, my shepherd, guiding me through days that were uncertain, but honest. I missed my family fiercely. I grieved a loss of my wife, my mother, my brothers, and some nights grief struck without warning, and I wept openly. Yet grief no longer ruled me. I placed their names before Jesus, trusting Him with what I could not repair. I learned that forgiveness does not excuse evil, it releases the victim, and that release was my healing. I found work among people who knew nothing of my past and treated me kindly without fear or expectation. I learned to laugh again, small laughter, at first cautious, then free scripture became food, not obligation. When I read about chains falling and prisoners freed, I smiled because I knew that story personally. I had lived behind invisible bars all my life, and now the door stood open, even if danger still lingered. I met others on the same road, some hiding, some outspoken, all brave in their own way, and we encouraged one another to endure, not with bitterness, but with hope. I stopped measuring life by safety and began measuring it by truth. Jesus did not give me revenge or restoration of status. He gave me something far greater. He gave me myself, redeemed and unafraid. I speak now, not as a victim, but as a witness. If you are watching this and living in fear, afraid of losing family, position, or life itself, I understand that fear. I lived inside it. But I tell you with honesty, there is no prison stronger than a lie. You are forced to live, and no freedom greater than truth embraced. Jesus did not promise ease. He promised life, and He keeps His promises. I lost everything the world said mattered and gained everything my soul needed. I am no longer a prince of men, but I am a child of God, and no authority can take that from me. My story is not finished, and yours is not either. If you are questioning, if you are searching, if you are tired of silence, know this: you are not owned, you are seen, you are loved, and Jesus is reaching for you the same way He reached for me in the darkest place of my life. I walk forward now, not with certainty of tomorrow, but with confidence in Christ, and that is enough.